Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our How to Become a Better Leader webinar. My name's Rebecca, and I'm part of the team at Heriot-Watt Online. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Greg Fantham, who is a course leader on our online Masters in Business and Organisational Psychology programme, and who will be leading our webinar today. Greg's also an assistant professor within the psychology department at Heriot-Watt Dubai and has extensive experience in teaching and also speaking and writing about various topics, including innovation, artificial intelligence, leadership and coaching. And today, Greg will be focusing on various aspects of leadership and leadership development, which is one of the key themes of our business psychology programs here. So I'll shortly hand over to Greg, but I wanted to let you know that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to pop them into the chat box and we'll do our best to address them by the end of this webinar. We also have Gemma Angus joining us, who's part of our enrolment team and will be on hand to help answer any questions you might have about the programme. And with that, I'll just pass on to Greg.
Hello, I'm Greg Fantham, and the brief today is that to look at the fundamental principles of effective leadership, gain insights into the role of psychology in leadership development, and understand how our online MSc program can empower you with the skills to excel as a leader. The focus really is going to be on the person to start with anyway. And leadership is embedded in a person or a small group, although we can discuss that assumption later. And that person is constrained or enabled by a situation, situational factors. And we're going to look at one of the classical approaches to this, developed by Fred Fiedler back in the 60s and 70s. It's a golden oldie. I'll just to give a taster of how psychologists try to specify what a situation looks like. And then the leader interacts with situations by adopting a style, either intentionally or unintentionally, or somewhere in between. And the style we're going to look at, again for a taster, is look at a bit of transformational leadership, which is a pretty popular theory around these days, often misunderstood, which we'll also maybe take a look at. However, as in all human sciences, no one approach is giving all the answers. And we have to be critical. We have to take things with a bit of a pinch of salt in the human sciences. And that's something else we're going to take a look at. That's a very important characteristic of a psychological approach. We're not simply taking theories off the shelf and telling you to apply them. What we're doing is you can take them off the shelf, but you need to open the package. You need to look under the lid or the hood of the glossy vehicle, the glossy sports car, and see what's going on inside and what might break down. And we're going to see how this works out with transformational leadership theory. And the best way to understand something is to teach it. At least that's what I found, and that's why it's called leadership and leadership development is the name of the actual course. And your development. You get to develop leadership in others as part of the course, while reflecting at the same time on your own skills and qualities while you're doing it. And that's a very important aspect of what we do. And finally, we'll examine the proposition that good leadership is good followership, is good leadership. And it's particularly pertinent nowadays with ever-evolving, flatter organizational designs. So let's move on. Let's have a look at the person. Now, Adrian Fantham, who's, I understand, the most published psychologist in the country anyway, in recent years, has some very useful things to say about leadership. It really is a neglected, unspoken about topic that has simply surfaced as a serious issue. More leaders fail and derail than become great successes. Yet the emphasis on the literature seems always to have been on the minority of good or great leaders. A number of leaders are let go early. Many are sacked, others end up in prison. Derailment and dark side leadership really is the elephant in the boardroom, the taboo topic. It's as if having been made a CEO, the chosen one, it's assumed that one has been carefully selected and groomed for success. It often becomes as a surprise that these high-flying wunderkinds are not mere mortals, but self-aggrandizing, reckless egoists. People want to know how it happens that derailers are chosen in the first place. This is a pretty powerful statement to make by one of our leading psychologists. And let's ask the question, how does this happen? Because this is one of the pressures that you will face, or maybe you are facing as a leader. First of all, the disposition and behaviours for getting there are not necessarily the same as the dispositions and behaviours for being there. Getting their behaviours, being competitive, elbowing people around perhaps, all of these may not be the characteristics that necessarily make you the best person for the job, for actually running things. There's actually a book called The Accidental Sales Manager by Chris Little, which describes how this can happen, that you become very successful at your job as a follower, and then your reward is to become a leader because of a higher salary, but the result is that you don't know what you're doing when you get there. So one of the big problems, and also what you find is that women tend to be rather better at being there than at getting there, which is why we have a relatively small proportion of women CEOs who are actually unusually good, and maybe a slightly larger proportion of CEOs, male CEOs, who are not so good. And what you end up with is that the person may well end up at the top there, looking a bit silly and feeling a bit uncertain about where they are. And this places considerable pressures on them, which can lead to all kinds of problems. Alan Greenspan, who was the chair of the US Federal Reserve for many years, from 1987 to 2006, he served under 3 presidents, I think, Republicans and Democrats, and his conclusion was that anyone who wants to become president of the United States should be banned from office for that precise reason. And he commented also that he was only half joking when he said that. In fact, back after in the age just after Napoleon became so significant in European history, there was actually a problem, a disease, if you like, called Napoleon complex, and the mental institutions were full of people who had delusions of being Napoleon for some years after the Napoleonic Wars. So here we are with our leader, and the pressures which result can lead to someone becoming impersonal, manipulative, narcissistic by way of defense, developing antisocial personality, Machiavellianism being manipulative, and narcissism being all the same wherever you find it. And this has actually become known as the dark triad of leadership, something which we'll investigate in some detail in the course. And this dark triad, it comes about really because once the ladder's gone, you're on your own, you're stuck. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go from here? In fact, Richard Ackerman and Pat Maslin-Ostrowski even described their study of leadership as the wounded leader. And they said the endemic and chronic condition of leadership life: vulnerability, isolation, fear, and power.
Oh, the loneliness of command.
As was placed so succinctly by the Muppets a few years ago. So Tom Burns, who smoked a pipe, he investigated this. So Tom Burns, by the way, was famous for developing theories about organizations which were not necessarily going to be hierarchical and mechanistic. His study, The Management of Innovation, back in the early 60s, was a leading force in this area. Discussing leadership, he commented that in normal life, we're continually testing out our answers to such all-important questions as, am I a likable person? Am I doing my job well? In other words, if I'm a normal person, someone's likely to tell me my label's sticking out. Or you still got toothpaste on your mouth. They're going to tell me that. That's not going to be too much of an issue. However, when we get the position in the hierarchy of a working organization, the normal situation is reversed. You enter what is in many respects an unreal world. You're through the looking glass. And going from that, as he says, one in which all responses to your actions and to yourself are filtered through the knowledge that you're in a position to control careers and occupational lives. Subordinates have to be and have much experience in training to help them be circumspect in their dealings with you. They have, as a matter of unthinking habit, to control not only their utterances but also the manner in which they are delivered. They have first to present themselves in the best light, and secondly to display the precise responses, hints and clues, which will give you the kind of reassurance about yourself and your conduct which they think you need at that moment. So in a leadership role, you become, in many ways, you can't help becoming increasingly isolated. Regardless of your own behavior, others will make that because they are designing themselves to fit what they think you want a lot of the time. Just jumped out of it there, I think. Yeah. In fact, Naomi Eisenberg, a neuropsychologist, found that social isolation itself is a source of pain, that it activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain does. So a social isolation of the leader is a physical pain, and that can be something which affects your decision-making, your thinking, and how you try to protect yourself against that. So what do you want? This is a very personal question, because if you want to go through all this, if you're going to subject yourself to all this, if you seriously think it's worth it, and that's what you're after, then you really need to clarify what it is that you want out of being a leader. And for the purposes of clarifying some general ideas, we can say, do you want to be a pure leader? And I'll come back to that in a moment, or a boss, or a somebody. Now, those are three very much interrelated things. And today, in this age of celebrity, being somebody is something which is very difficult to get away from. It's a kind of natural, almost like a natural impulse we have. And becoming the boss is in many ways the only way you have of getting more money, of getting the kind of status that people might want in society. And so back in the day, Andy Warhol there did say that we would all be famous, everyone would be famous for 15 minutes, he reckons. And that very much tuned in to, he was very much ahead of his time in the way that celebrity and, having lots of likes and so on, all those things on social media, all of those things have become the way things are. So being somebody is a very powerful motivation. And then being the boss in any hierarchy is something which can be seen simply as a badge of success, that you've made it up the hierarchy, and when you got to the top, then there you are. It's you've got it, and you can show that you've been successful. So those three things can overlap. And the other one, being a leader, pure leader, something often comes up. Lao Tzu, the Confucian philosopher, specifies that true leaders are hardly known to their followers. When the work's done right, with no fuss or boasting, ordinary people say, "Oh, we did it." Now that's often turns up, I've noticed, in leadership, business seminars and things. And in fact, it's fine, it's great, but it's not necessarily that realistic. In general, people need to have some of the other stuff. You need to have income, you need to have recognition. So it's not necessarily the case that we're going to be aiming at that pure leadership end there. So given that a one leader trait that most studies agree on is clarity of thought, it's certainly worth at this point maybe reflecting just for a moment on where you think you are here. Do you think, where's your line? Are you going to go, do you think you're more in the middle of all of them? Do you think honestly, do you think you're a bit more over to the right-hand side there? Do you really think you're maybe drifting over to the left? Is that where you're going? Those are considerations that you need to think about when you're deciding that the leadership is the kind of thing that you want to get into. And that's, I'd reckon that's a key notion. And we're going to do that in the course. We have a significant section where you're asked to reflect on what it is you really want. What are you? Where do you stand on this in this area? And maybe that will change. That changes as you proceed over time. So I'm not going to ask people to put down what they think, but just reflect on that yourself for a moment. Just consider where you think you would be. In general, as a matter of interest, students on the course tend to put themselves sort of over here. They're quite honest about wanting to be pure leaders, but tend to drift over and appreciate the instincts and the drives which take you towards the celebrity and the boss elements as well. Again, just as a little exercise here, let's take a look. Here we have the ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. Where do you think she might be on there? By contrast, where might the ex-president, there he is again, of the United States, Donald Trump, where might you put him in that graph? Where might you put Greta Thunberg? Where does she belong there? Mahendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India for quite some time now, where would he go in your estimation? Or where would the inevitable Elon Musk, where would he go over there? I don't know whether anybody wants to make any suggestions over to the whether it's over to the left, right, or bottom. We're interested to see what anyone has to say, but maybe you have your own thoughts about that. But I think what many people would suggest is that they belong in different places. These are all leaders who have found themselves in one way or another and would identify in different parts of that graph. So there isn't an ideal part of it. As we've seen, it may all relate to the kind of thing you're doing, what's happening. Anyone got any suggestions about where people belong? Maybe Jacinda Ardern, would you put her left, right, or bottom? L, R, or B? That's up to you. No suggestions yet. Might get some thoughts later on. So moving on, we have, so for example, many people tend to put Donald somewhere over right on the right-hand side there. See if you agree with that. So the person then is interacting in a situation. And this situation, we're going to take, as I say, we'll look at it from the point of view of Fred Fiedler's theories. It's quite a useful one, quite a useful way. He comes up with 3 dimensions for describing the situation a leader might find themselves in. And one of them is relationships, and this is in terms of, well, are relationships close, harmonious, pleasantly interactive, creative? Are they, on the other hand, distant? Are they maybe conflictual? Are they highly competitive? This would be one of the dimensions on which you could measure the situation in which you find yourself. And task structure. Is the task pretty well defined anyway? We know where we're going, it's pretty much mapped out, and we all know what's going to happen. It's just a case of marshalling our way there. Alternatively, there's pretty much an open space, and it's up for grabs as to what we decide the task is and how we do it. And the third dimension is position power. In this case, are you in the position where you have the carrot and the stick, where in effect you can provide incentives, you can provide penalties of one sort or another. Alternatively, are you basically empty-handed? You have to rely on other considerations to do what you're after. For example, if you're up in the top office there, the top corner office there at night, and you're speaking to your minions and you're saying deliver, it's their job to deliver solutions of one sort or another. And we could say that this particular situation is one where the relationships are not particularly close, don't need to be. The task structure is pretty much well defined, and the position power is also quite clear that the boss has all kinds of incentives and penalties that they can play around with. This is a typical of a traditional bureaucratic kind of organisation, perhaps, one which doesn't change a great deal. By contrast, let's take a look at this one. And what do you think about this?
Google is kind of a unique company for me. And I think for a lot of people that work there. What Google does is it allows you a fantastic environment to be innovative and to get your product developed really quickly.
It is a very different structure than the rest of the engineering community.
We always really try to avoid bureaucracy so that people can really do what makes sense in their project.
One thing that's great about Google is that you have a lot of autonomy over your product and its directions.
We're encouraged to work on whatever we think is important. Often the best ideas come from employees.
Of course, you've got to be very careful with these. We use these case studies you have to be very careful because this is what the company wants to present itself as. But let's just take it as read that that's the way things are for the moment anyway. So there we would find that, yeah, we could probably say that our relationships are more fluid and organic. We probably say that we have more of an open space in which to define the tasks, and also that the leader, given that the tasks and the other factors are not so clear, isn't going to be using so much of the position power, and will be holding back on that in order to give people space. And this time, these dimensions are actually presented as a three-dimensional structure by Fiedler, and as you can see, there's task structure, there's position power, and leader-member relations can all be mapped onto a technical kind of graph, which in turn should provide you with various routes given your relationships and task and power, your position power, given the various ratings that they might have. They are meant to determine what kind of style you should adopt when you're being a leader, or what kind of leader you should have. This is one of the approaches to defining the situation, quite a technical one, and one which we do explore in some detail. It has advantages and disadvantages. There have been many developments since then. So moving on then, we've said that we need to adopt a style, and let's take a look now at, as I say, a very popular style, which is the whether or not transformational leadership style. And it's often associated, as I've suggested there, with charismatic leadership. And in this sense, what you could say about transformational leadership theory is that it's actually made an effort to tame charisma and put it into a more sensible context, and pointing out that being charismatic isn't the only thing you need to be. That being intellectually stimulating has to combine with that, together with individualized consideration, together with a concern for relationships. And those three things together are meant to define a good transformational leader, not just charisma. That's worth emphasizing. And so that's not all there is in transformational leadership either. The theory actually consists of a lot more than that. It consists of other types. It suggests that maybe there's a transactional type as well, in which you have exchange between, fair exchange between leaders and followers, and where the manager will fix things ahead of time, perhaps. And then there's a third one, which is, they call it non-leadership, which is a little harsh, or laissez-faire, where a bad side of it is that, yeah, you manage by exception, you fix things only after they're broken, which is not so good. But there can be occasions when a laissez-faire approach could be most appropriate. If everything's going fine, and you don't need anything to change at the moment, then an aggressively transformational leadership approach isn't necessarily the right one to offer. So there may be there's certainly room for switching between these different styles within the theory of transformational leadership. So we've had a look at the theory there, one theory, but it's, as I said before, it's really important to take these with a pinch of salt. And that's one of them. And let's take that as an example. Being critical is one of the key features of this course. And so here we have, let's say, the glossy exterior of transformational leadership, sounding very bright. Not quite the sound of a Volkswagen, but nevertheless pretty bright. And what we try to do is to look under the hood of the glossy theory and see what might go wrong, what could be an issue. One of the problems is that when people are given questionnaires about their leader, and a lot of this theory is based on what people say about their leader and how they express that, they're given these questionnaires with multiple choices. And if they think their leader's good, there's always a very strong chance that they will slip into good sounding words, the words that are buzzwords for a good leader, like inspirational, stimulating, concern for others. And that will then generate the idea that their leader is transformational, which those are the main characteristics. Yet, what you often find is that someone who's not transformational, who's actually a good transactional leader, gets called transformational because their followers want to give them all the nicest adjectives they can. And this can skew the ideas about the effectiveness of transformational leadership. Another problem is that just come back to those horses in a minute. Another problem is that the followers always have a very restricted view of what's going on upstairs. That you can't judge the leader with a 360-degree view. You're just looking from below or from behind, and the follower's view can often be very biased. So, as it's often said, if you're not the lead horse in when you're pulling the wagon, then your view is not going to change much throughout the journey. So that can lead to a rather biased perspective on whether someone is an effective transformational leader or not. That's just one example. There's loads and loads and loads of these. That's just one example of how we set about just tapping away at some of the possible overly comfortable assumptions that people tend to make about theory. And then we teach it to understand it, as I mentioned before. And in this, you'll be asked to proceed with a leadership development activity of some kind. And what you need to do is try to do the kind of things that I've tried to do here. So, for example, your activity would be with 1 or 2 people, could be more if you like. And you'd introduce a challenge or a hook, maybe, what makes transformational leadership, or what is charisma, something along those lines. Information you would then provide based on theory and research. You would provide a concise version of the relevant bits of whatever theory you're wanting to apply. And then you have some kind of activities. I mean, one activity which we do operate in the course anyway is trying to formulate the kind of questions which you think would find out whether a leader is truly transformational according to the definitions. How would you narrow down and clarify the kind of questions you ask to reduce the possibility of misunderstandings? That could be one kind of activity that people might engage in. And then we process and see what we've found. Very often what you find is that the kind of problems that students, people who you're working with, raise are often the same ones that have been raised in the academic literature. That intuitively, if you've laid it out, people will often pick up some of the issues that are underlying the problems that these theories might have. And then your task would be to convert this into some kind of real-world application. How can they apply this in their own situations? And that would be how that would operate. You would then reflect on what you've done. And this is a reflective activity. You look at what happened. You would say what it means. What do you think the implications of that are? And what are you going to do about it? Next time you run something like this, what would you do? How would you do it? How would you do it differently? And this reflection is a good example of another key philosophy of the course, really, which is reusable assignments. That the assignments that you would do are not designed to be the things that you do, like an exam you throw away when you finished it and you forget about it, or might stick it into a cupboard and never look at it again, or look at it with nostalgia or misery. The assignments are meant to be things which you can pick up and apply next time around. It's practically orientated. Okay, so finally, let's examine this proposition that good leadership is good fellowship, is good leadership. And what we find is that in traditional organizations, the old ones, let's take this Ford factory back in the 1920s, very hierarchical structure, and the purpose was to make sure those cars kept coming off the production line. And the hierarchy was designed so that the person at the top, in this case Henry Ford, he receives accountability from below, and each layer has accountability coming from there. And then command comes from above. And this interaction of accountability coming up and command coming down is the way the hierarchy would operate and ensure that those cars would be coming consistently off the production line. This wouldn't change. There wouldn't be that much change. I mean, the Model T Ford didn't change for a good 15 years or so, just being produced the same one over and over again. So the key was production, and so the command and accountability was something which could establish and become pretty much institutionalized over a period of time. And this is quite characteristic of organizations for a long time. So now we take a look and we move on, and let's have a look. So Henry Ford would be up there in the big office and nothing would change too much. But now, in recent years, we have so much differentiated demand, so much sophisticated demand coming from sophisticated consumers who know what they want, and a capacity of supply which is much more agile, much faster than it used to be. It means that those kind of hierarchical structures start to crumble under those twin pressures. And the result of that is that you get a collapse of that structure into what Henry Mintzberg described as an innovative or organic or flat structure, something which is more like a blob than a hierarchy. And one in which you find that the organization is constantly evolving. You never know quite where it is. One department could become another department, or two of them might join together. One wing becomes the main part of the organization. Another one, which you thought was important, becomes less important over time. So change is emergent, and relationships with the environment can be quite ambiguous. What was in the organization at one stage is not in it anymore, which leads to the idea that followers need to be leaders and leaders need to be followers. And this is a cycle which more recent organizational forms tend to present as in a more sophisticated and developed form. Taking a simple example, let's have a look at Orpheus, the conductorless orchestra. And now, typically, we're used to an orchestra having a conductor at the top. And again, the usual structure operates. We have command coming down, and we have accountability from the orchestral players coming up. In Orpheus, which is one of the case studies we look at, you find that once you remove the conductor, then, I just lost something here, I think. Yes, there we go. I don't want to miss that. As you lose the conductor, so then those command lines retract, and then we find that the relationships between the components start to become more important, more sophisticated, more varied, more multidimensional, and each individual takes on a much more important role within that. But those individuals, as the structure varies from time to time to adapt, those individuals need to learn skills of leadership. Amongst these, they found in the Orpheus Orchestra, they found, for example, that listening was something that they had to do. Previously, the conductor would be in that space and listening to what they're all doing and then commenting on it, coming back to them. Now they would listen to each other even more than they did before. And so individuals have to take on the responsibilities that previously they had loaded on to the leader. Possibly one of the reasons why those leaders felt so much pressure. At the same time, they had to find a voice. It wasn't just the leader who had to find a way of being expressive, of expressing themselves, of articulating themselves. Now the members of the orchestra each had to find their own voice. How should they express what they want to say to the others so that other people understand it easily and quickly? And they have to genuinely ask themselves, now, what do I have to offer? Why me? Why should I be saying something? Do I genuinely have something to offer here? It's not just that conductor's up there and I'm being frustrated. Now I can say what I want. Do I genuinely have something to offer? These are all questions which the removal of a leader caused the members to ask themselves and had to struggle with for quite some time. And reading the room, again, is something which was left to the leader. Now each individual has got to have some sense of what's going on. And learning when to shut up. Crucial. That it's very easy to slip into talking to people, saying what you want, saying what you think, taking on the role of the conductor for yourself, which people are going to get very bored with very quickly. So learning to shut up is actually one of the key roles, key functions of being an effective leader follower or follower leader. And then having a conciliatory tone, buffering your response, making sure that you're not going to cause conflict unnecessarily. So these skills are all skills which we possibly need to learn in far more comprehensively in order to function in a modern organic organization. Leadership's still there, but maybe it doesn't have to be located in one person on whom those pressures may be intolerable. So we've had a look at person, situation, style, being critical, teach it to understand it. Good leadership is good followership, is good leadership. And all this could be, we could consider this to be a mountain. Is it a mountain which is a challenge as leaders proceed? Or is it a volcano waiting to explode? You never know with leadership. It's a winding road which could go in lots of different directions. Or could it just be an ant-heap where you've got loads of people beavering away and sort of coming to the top almost by accident? Who knows? But these are different ways in which leadership can be portrayed, and can be portrayed in all kinds of ways, most of them perfectly realistically. To finish off with, there's a question for you. And that is, what is your leader? Or how do you see yourself as a leader? You may, given the nature of organisations these days, it may be a bit of both. Let's just remove the usual suspects here. Let's get them out of the way. This is one way in which people might see a leader, which is strong, confident, protective, courageous. This is the typical image that we tend to be sold. However, there is this one. The leader, possibly even more familiar, the leader is anxious, as wary, as a little fearful, as under the burden of expectation and the unexpected. So where are you? If we were to take the continuum here, here's the one side, let's go across to the other. Over here we have the wolf, and here we have a good old Likert scale. And where do you think you are, or where do you think your leader is on that scale from 1 to 5, or from 5 to 1? Just a thought to leave you with, and something which will again have an opportunity to explore in greater detail in the course of the course, if you should choose to take an interest. Thanks very much. I think that moves to the last slide, which is any questions, and I'll hand over to Rebecca to deal with that.